This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
It's Heard Tell Show. Thursday, this is January the 13th. Thrilled to have you with us. We have a lot to go over on the program today. We have Addison Hosner, an attorney down in Florida, a Young Voices contributor, going to talk about some financial corruption in Congress. We're going to talk about a couple who put together a Smithsonian exhibition, one piece at a time, like the old Johnny Cash song. Talk about that. Talk some conspiracy theories as well. But we want to start with the economy. The numbers have come out, folks. Headline Washington Post, the inflation we saw in 2021 was the highest in 40 years. December's prices were 7% up year over year. Everybody from the Biden administration to economists to commentators are reacting to this. Let's try to turn down the noise on it just a little bit. From the Washington Post, quote, prices rose at the fastest pace in 4 decades in December, increasing 7% over the same period from a year ago, and cementing 2021 as the year marked by soaring inflation wrought by the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Prices were also up 0.5% in December compared to the months before, according to data released on Wednesday by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. While high, inflation actually eased from the rapid price growth seen in October and November. Understand what they're saying here. They're saying the rise is slowing, not that there's not any inflation. It's just not growing as fast as it was. Back to the piece. On an annual basis, 2021 still saw the fastest price inflation since the early 1980s, as broken supply chains collided with higher consumer demand for used cars and construction materials and alike. Higher prices seeped into just about everything from households and businesses by raising alarms for policymakers of the Federal Reserve and the White House that inflation has spread throughout the economy. Inflation has emerged as the top threat to the economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic, as well as a sizable political risk, as Republicans continue to blame stimulus measures for overheating the economy, even though relief packages passed during both the Biden and Trump administrations. President Biden said in a statement that slowly month-to-month price growth showed the administration was making progress in its initiatives to slow the pace of inflation. At the same time, Biden said, this report underscores that we still have more work to do, with the price increases still too high and squeezing family budgets. Steep increases in the cost of housing and using cars and trucks powered the overall rise in prices. Economists have been especially worried about rising home and rent costs, which can get locked in through a long-term contract and may not improve after the pandemic abates or the supply chains clear up. Throughout the pandemic, used cars have consistently driven the cost of living high, as a global supply shortage of microchips and high consumer demand for autos have sent prices to unprecedented highs. From a demand side, this is great, but the challenge is being able to meet that demand given the supply chain and workforce constraints, said Chad Mottry, chief economist at the American National Association of Manufacturers. Mottry has said a narrow majority of the group's members believe supply issues will ease in the second half of this year, although the chip and worker shortages could continue to be a problem. One bright spot was gasoline fell 0.5% in December after months of steep increases. White House officials have been hoping for a turnaround following their moves over the past few months to lower the prices at the pump, including releasing strategic oil reserves in November. Still, gas remains 50% more expensive than it was a year ago. The article continues, but you get the gist of it. There's no way to spin worst inflation in 40 years. That's bad. That's not good. Now, there are reasons for it. There are extenuating circumstances. Obviously, the pandemic has had a major effect on things. There's been supply chain issues. All those things are true. But extenuating circumstances does not change the baseline problem. Inflation is at a 40-year high, and people are freaked out about it. When people have to pay more money for things, they notice that. They don't always notice policy changes. They don't always notice political appointees. They don't always notice major pieces of legislation. They don't even notice elected officials coming and going a lot of times. When people go to the store and got to pay more, they notice. When people try to buy a car and can't afford it, they notice. When gas is high, they notice. Folks notice inflation. It is just one of those things that the administration is not going to have a good answer for because they got no way to spin it. When people have to go in the store and spend more money on stuff, it makes them mad. That makes them frustrated. And frustration is going to get pointed at the government, especially government that spent most of the last 2 years promising that aid package after aid package would help them. And it did put money in a lot of pockets. But if inflation goes up and things are more expensive, that money is mostly long gone, long spent, and not coming again. Now, the administration is already tinkering around with the idea of asking for even more aid from Congress, even more money spent. And people that think that this constant spending is going to make inflation worse at some point are going to get louder and louder. And let's not be Pollyannish here. This is an election year. This is an election year in which the ruling Democratic Party, which has the White House, the House, and the Senate, is expected to not do particularly well in. The old adage holds true. It's the economy, stupid. And you can talk about anything you want, political wise, policy wise, or whatever. But if there's problems with the economy, real or perceived, and people are perceiving there's a problem, and economists are saying, yeah, there's a real problem here. It's not bad yet, but it could get worse. This is going to be a very big issue in an election year. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the administration to try to do more something here when a lot of do something that we've been doing hasn't done a lot to fix inflation. In fact, you could argue it's making it worse. If they just keep dumping money in the economy, eventually it's going to catch up with everybody. Interest rates are going to go up somewhere in here. The Fed's already talking about somewhere around the March timeframe. They may raise interest rates as many as 3 times this coming year. These things all don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a sequence, and they start another sequence of events. Now, is that sequence of events going to lap up on the Democratic shores in November? I don't know. They're already in line for a tough haul with cyclical and historical trends for the midterm. But if the economy gets ugly, this election might get even uglier than we already think it's going to be. Again, people don't fully understand terms like inflation. I know I don't. That's why we have very knowledgeable people come on Heard Tell and explain economic things to us. They explain inflation. They try to break it down for us and turn down the noise of when do you panic? When do you not panic? What really does affect it? What doesn't affect it? What policies should we have? What policies do we not have? These are things you can go back and look at the episodes of our economist friends, and they don't always agree on it, but we try to give you a wide perspective to have a basis of knowledge going forward. This inflation story is going to be hanging over top of all other stories. So while we're talking about legislation, or we're talking about politics, we're talking about whatever the latest culture war thing is, just understand inflation hovers above all that because everything that every single person buys gets affected by inflation. You start hitting people in their pocketbooks, they start paying attention to politics where they otherwise wouldn't. And it doesn't matter what your priors are, they're going to point the blame at the people that are in charge. Right now, that's a Democratic president, a Democratic Congress, and a Democratic Senate by way of a tiebreak. And it's an election year. Still, the economy's stupid. And this economy has a lot of red light warning bells going off right now. And this administration doesn't have a lot of things to fix it outside of doing some optic fixes and spending more money. That may not get it done come November. May not get it done in the preceding months as people try to go to the store and buy things and find their pocketbooks and paychecks don't go as far as they should. Some stories are bigger than politics. Inflation is that kind of a story, and it bears watching very closely. We don't want to ever just panic. We want to talk to knowledgeable people and get good information about it. But let's be real here. This isn't going away anytime soon. This didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to get fixed in the next couple of weeks or even the next couple of months. It's probably not going to get fixed before the November election. And it's something that's going to be the cloud over top of everything else we're doing in 2022. So just keep it in mind now, inflation is not going anywhere, and we better understand it so we don't get took on a ride by commentators and politicians who are betting we don't understand it and want to sell us a bill of goods. Educate yourself, keep your bearing, and 2022 is going to be a rough enough year without us jumping the gun on things like inflation. But we better pay attention to it. We better understand it as best we can, because we don't seem to have a whole lot of control over it right at the moment. We'll do more Heard Tell right after this. It's Heard Tell Show. Welcome back. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Appreciate you staying with us. I want to set up the story our guest is going to be covering. Addison Hosner is going to join us, another great Young Voices contributor and attorney. And he wrote a piece back right before Christmas, but it's kind of developed since then, and we're going to cover it a little bit today. Writing in Spectator, he's called this piece, Insider Trading in Congress, a Love Story. Members of Congress have made fortunes selling out the American people. Now, before we get into the details of this, of course, this is nothing new. Scandals and financial and insider trading has been going on in Congress for years and years and years. We know that the members of Congress and also the senators and other government officials have this amazing ability to go to Washington middle class and come out the other side rich. That does not happen accidentally. We all understand there are things like corruptions, but even by DC standards, this is getting pretty rank. Just to quote from the piece a little bit, quoting from Addison Hosner's piece, this isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. It is an issue of ethics and right from wrong. Members of Congress, particularly the most wealthy, have made fortunes selling out the American people right under their nose in a time of global uncertainty. No matter your political affiliation, this behavior from your elected officials should signal outrage and a demand for accountability. What is essentially occurring within congressional members is insider trading, a specific form of securities trading that is outlawed and governed by the SEC. That's the Securities and Exchange Commission, not the football conference, for those of you from Logan. Don't let Pelosi or other congressional members pull the wool over your eyes. Make no mistake, the information and reports that Congress receives is de facto material insider information and should preclude them from making trades to their own personal benefit. By definition, material insider information is information that, if known, could reasonably be expected to affect the value of a company's stock, or which would affect the judgment and investment judgment of a person deciding to buy or sell that stock. I'm reading from Addison Hosner's Spectator piece here. Now, consider the information congressional members hold when reviewing confidential data, reports, or when a proposed bill is being drafted but yet to be made public. This should signal material insider information loud and clear. And yet Speaker Pelosi seems to either be highly naive or feigning ignorance as to how that information is being used. Either way, her views are disingenuous to the problem. But what about the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act, or the STOCK Act, from our Congress critters that love their acronyms, which was passed in 2012 to prevent this exact type of trading? Despite the language and intent of the act, the STOCK Act has largely just been lip service to address the problem. Too often are the mandate disclosures of stock trades late or not reported by members of Congress, and without a consistent pattern of sanctions, those that do violate the act go largely unpunished and under-investigated. Dozens of lawmakers and 102 congressional staffers have been found in violation, but what comes of it? Nothing. When compared to the average citizen, this is Addison Hosner writing in Spectator, the double standard is astounding. If you or I were audited for insider trading and found to have used information similar to that which is used by members of Congress when trading securities, we'd have a court date and would be facing potentially 20 years in federal prison. But when your senator does it, the powers that be turn a blind eye. Who watches the watchmen? Who holds these people accountable? When those who write the laws write them in a way to create a protectionist bubble for insider investment for themselves, what can be done? This is a real problem, a nonpartisan one, and one that could result in further corruption of our government. Our highest offices are not to be attained for personal gain. They are to elect individuals who stand for the values of the communities they represent. Their duties are to write and enact laws that improve the lives of Americans, not write laws that line their pocketbooks with dubiously timed securities trading. That's Addison Hosner, writing in Spectator back on December the 22nd. This story has developed since then. He has a lot of stats and figures he's going to explain to us. He's also going to break it down for us when we talk to him in just a few minutes on the program. But broadly, I want to talk about why we touch on something like corruption like this. It's important. The American system of government is unique in the world because it is the greatest experiment in human history of a free people self-governing. And a free people self-governing does not work without that government being accountable to the people. Now, that sounds really Pollyannish because we know there's corruptions. We know the Leviathan of government gets bigger and bigger and just chews up all kinds of things, and that there's plenty of shady stuff going on underneath. Now, that doesn't mean we should excuse it when we find it, when we see it, and when we become aware of it. I'm one of those people who think very strongly that liberty and freedom is the way to go, but liberty and freedom, especially in a self-governing people, has to go hand in hand with accountability. If you don't have accountability, you have corruption. And anywhere you have corruption, you have tyranny peering right around the corner. If we have a government that is so corrupt that it is no longer accountable, it doesn't really matter whether you elect somebody that ideologically or politically aligns with your viewpoint. You're not going to get anything good out of it. You don't get good water from a bad well. And when we allow corruption like this, we're just setting ourselves up for a whole lot of heartache and problems in our country. So when you get a figure like he's going to cite of, almost a fifth of Congress making exorbitant amounts of money in trades that are at best morally questionable and at worst criminally actionable if they weren't members of Congress and being protected, this is a major issue. It doesn't do us any good to just yell at the TV and complain about Washington and complain about Congress and complain about this, that, and the other if we're not willing to do something when we actually have something actionable. We need to find people that are like this, that are corrupt. We need to primary them. We need to vote them out of office. We need to hound them out of office. We do have power in the press and we have power in our votes to deal with situations like this. But like with a lot of things, the most common ingredient isn't what we can or can't do. It's being willing to do it. This is one of those things where the most important part of it is just having enough give a damn to actually take action and be loud about it and complain about it and use social media for something other than sending cat pictures and try to actually hold our government accountable. This is important stuff. It's an important topic. It's something that needs to be discussed. And it's one of those things that we will continually discuss whenever it comes up on Heard Tell. So when we come back, Addison Hosner joins us. We're going to talk a little corruption in Congress. We're going to talk about insider trading. We're going to talk about how it's a bipartisan problem and how it's everybody's concerned to not have corruption in government. We'll do that on Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Excited about this one. New guy on the program. Been wanting to put this together with him for a while. Finally got it done. Addison Hosner. He's an attorney. He's a Young Voices contributor. He's down in Florida doing a lot of civil litigation stuff, and we have some civil matters to discuss with him today. How are you, sir?
Doing good, Aaron. Andrew, I apologize. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I promise you I've been called far worse by far more important people. Don't sweat it one little bit. You've been writing in the Spectator about Congress and trading, and we don't mean baseball cards. We mean stocks, bonds, and other things. I just kind of want to open the floor for you to explain this to folks, because just on the side of this, to the common person, look at it, there's no way this is right, legal, or moral, or whatever else ground you want to put on. This thing just looks bad all the way around, don't it?
Yeah, Andrew, I'll just start from the top here. I mean, this story has been developing. I wrote that piece back in kind of the tail end of December of last year. And the first reports that I was kind of seeing of this insider trading with Congress was back in around October of last year. But I promise you it's been going on for a lot longer than that. I would presume decades. The main issue here is there's been some questions raised, especially directed at our current Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, about stock holdings that look very suspiciously timed, that have benefited her and many other members of Congress in a very scrupulous way. And make no mistake, I'd like to really emphasize this isn't a partisan issue. This is on both sides of the aisle. Republicans and Democrats are both really taking advantage of the information that they have from their public office positions. So, the big issue here was there's some members of Congress and a lot of people in the general public who want to prevent or outright ban congressional members from being able to trade securities. And, as a free market guy, the idea of banning people from participating in the market, that does rub me slightly wrong. I give that a lot of pause. But when you really think about the people we're talking about, these are not just your, average Joe. These are people who are writing our laws and who have information about what's going to occur, what's going to affect these stocks, what's going to affect our markets. And so for them to utilize that information from an office in which we elected them to, it's problematic. People are worried about corruption as it is. And with this happening, I think we're going to have a developing issue of people maybe running for office, not for the intent to help the general welfare of our public, but for their own personal gain. And that's what's essentially happening right now. So the speaker came out and openly said, we're a free market. We should be able to participate in these things, and has really been very lenient on trying to enforce regulation on congressional members. So that's where we stand right now, and we can delve into it a little more.
Yeah. And like you said, this is anybody that's watched Congress with any kind of paying attention. This is not a new issue. I know on the Senate side, Richard Burr is being forced into retirement over a similar scandal. Not a household name, but a very powerful senator for many, many years. He's got some questionable trading activities that is basically pushing him out of office now. We can go back in history and find lots of examples of this. Where it gets messy, though, is you have somebody like the Speaker of the House, whose spouse, her husband, is a very wealthy individual from trading and other business affairs. Obviously, there's a lot of tentacles to this. How do we start kind of getting our arms around a story that's this big? Because obviously you have people in halls of power. We have Congress people. They're in charge of things like regulating. They have the power of the purse, these things. Just where do we even start getting into something this big? Because we know there's something wrong, but it's so big, you kind of see it from the outside. It's like, how do I even start approaching this issue?
Yeah, so Andrew, I think a good place to even start tackling with this issue is we go back to basically the public trust. And, we talk about how big the problem is. The Pew back in 1958 started a poll about people's opinions and trust in government officials back in 1958. And at that point, 73% of the American public trusted our government officials. The last time that poll was conducted was in April of 2021. And only 24% of Americans actually believe and trust our government officials. And I would surmise that percentage is much lower now than it was in April of last year. So when we look at the issue, there's 535 congressional members, voting members. Of those 535, 430 of them last year did not make any securities trading. So that's a vast majority. The problem we have here, though, is 105 members did do securities trading. And those 105 members in 2021 alone racked up $290 million in the buying and selling of stocks. 105 individuals, $290 million. It's incomprehensible, especially when you consider the average salary of a congressional member is $174,000. Speaker Pelosi's salary is $223,000 annually. And yet the millions that they're generating from these sales is astonishing. This isn't even taking into account the $140 million in options trading, which, if the listeners aren't aware, put and call options are basically betting on stock prices, whether they will go up or down. And there was $140 million in options trading last year by 6 congressional members. 6 members, $140 million. There was $124 million in private equity funds by 19 congressional members. And then, on a much smaller scale, but I think it's mainly because of the age of congressional members not understanding the technology yet, $500,000 in cryptocurrency trading occurred as well by only 6 members. So where do we start and how do we address this? And we look right now, John Ossoff, who's a senator from Georgia, he's a Democrat, is proposing a bill right now in which congressional members have to put all their any securities trading into a blind trust. And that blind trust will then be where any investments they want to do will occur while they're in office. He wants to ban the spouses and family members of these congressional members from being able to make trades. I haven't been able to delve into the specific language. I would, instead of, again, banning someone from participating, I think family members, spouses, congressional members, blind trusts, I think is a decent solution for this. There's, 2 outspoken members of Congress right now, Alexandria Ocasio, AOC, as she's referred to. She's very partisan in people's opinions of her, but she's been very outspoken and a champion of the American people, of saying that this is wrong and people are benefiting from this. So I do commend her for trying to bring attention to this issue. On the Republican side, there's been two who have been outspoken and are presenting their own bills, and that's Chip Roy and Michael Cloud, both Republicans out of Texas. So there is some bipartisan support here, but the problem is the vast majority of these 105 members of Congress are going to oppose this. I mean, why would they get rid of what's been lining their pocketbooks? So, I make a point in the article I wrote about who watches the Watchmen. And that's essentially what we have here. How do we assist in helping a situation in which the people who could assist are the same ones profiting from their own racketeering? And my only call to help is to look at these reports, the public disclosures by the public officials, and vote them out. That's really your best recourse here. You'd have to get rid of these individuals to then put people in who want to fix the problem, because until we do that, how can we govern those who govern us?
Yeah, we're talking to Addison Hosner about Congress and trading. Let's do some nomenclature real quick. Put your lawyer hat on for it and explain this to me like I'm five, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Just knowing something's going to happen and buying stock about it, that's not necessarily insider trader by the legal terminology. Now, obviously, we have an extra layer here because we have lawmakers, so they have even more knowledge about things like maybe pending regulation, or obviously they deal with lobbyists who have insider information and run. Work through the nomenclature a little bit for us here, because we're throwing a lot of terms around. Just make sure everybody's on the same page that what is an insider trading in its normal term, and then what would be inappropriate trading when it comes to a lawmaker, because those two things might have a little bit of uniqueness to them.
Right. So insider trading, which is regulated by the SEC, at the federal level, is any trade that is done with information that is provided to someone or to some corporate entity that would have any influence at all on the stock price, whether it be going up or going down, or any information at all that you would have. For example, let's say Microsoft has a new piece of technology they want to introduce, but Congress is discussing a potential regulation that would either limit or completely get rid of this new piece of technology. Well, if a Congress member is sitting on that board or that committee, and they know that this legislation is being talked about, and 2 weeks down the road, they're going to present it, they buy put options on a stock, which is a pretty much betting that this stock will be a lower price by this date. And they do that. And then 2 weeks down the road, they introduce this bill that says, we're not going to allow this piece of technology to enter the public sector. And so then their put option pays out massively. They make, in this situation, millions of dollars. That would be an example of insider trading. They have used information that the public is not privy to. It is nothing that you or I would understand or have any knowledge of, but they're using it to their own personal gain. And I think the highest profile case of this with the public citizen is Martha Stewart. If you think back, I think it was back in the early 2000s, she was given a tip by her investment broker or someone along those lines that, hey, this stock is going to tank because there's something going on within the business. You should sell this now, or the term that's used is shorting it. You short the sale of the stock. She did that and then was audited and found to have used insider information to benefit herself financially. She was sentenced to 5 months in federal penitentiary, as well as sanctions. That is insider information. Now, a trade that a congressional member or someone could use that is not insider information is simply, a good example right now is Reddit. If anyone is kept stocks on the GameStop issue and Wall Street bets and all of that, going into a public forum and discussing something with your friends, saying, hey, I got a good feeling about GameStop. I think that's going to go up. Or I have a good feeling about Apple. The new iPhone looks really good. And you go, you know what? Yeah, I do like the new iPhone. Or I do think GameStop's going to be a good stock in the future. And so you go out and buy it, and then it goes up and you sell and make money. That's not insider trading. That's simply discussion between public citizens. I mean, congressional members can do that. But what Congress is doing is using their information from their committees, using the regulations they know they're going to put forth, and then profiting from that. So that's, I guess, the easiest way I can explain the difference between the two.
Yeah, we're talking to Addison Hosner, breaking down this story that he is covering along with others about insider trading and some untoward financial things going on in our Congress. We're going to continue to break into this with him when we continue right after this on Heard Tell. Welcome back to Heard Tell. We're talking to Addison Hosner. We're going through his piece he wrote in The Spectator and updating it some because it's been a little while and we've had some developments since then about what's going on in Congress. Something you said earlier jumped out at me, and I just wanted to come back to it for a second. if you have 105 members of Congress with this massive dollar sign, we're talking about trying to reform a problem. That's a fifth of Congress. So when we're talking about, Congress, there's what should happen. But then when you go to vote, there's math. When you've already got a fifth of the Congress that's already embroiled in this thing, it kind of makes somebody like me that's just an outsider looking at it, that makes me skeptical that they're actually going to do anything to self-regulate here.
Yeah, it's I don't like to sound pessimistic, but it's definitely grim. Again, there's reports, thankfully, that are coming out now. And I do think the growing development of this story, it's really exploding. Anywhere you turn, I feel like I see Nancy Pelosi articles and congressional articles about insider trading. But the most recent report I saw today, just must have recently came out in the last 24 hours, shows that 35 members of that 105 actually beat the S&P 500. Now, the S&P 500 is an ETF fund, which is basically you put your money in and they do the stock trading for you. It's kind of put your money in and let it sit. 35 of those 105 actually beat that figure. And that figure usually goes up. It's always in the positive. It rarely is not outperforming the market on general. Well, 35 members of Congress outperformed that. At the very top, again, it's a nonpartisan issue, but the names are released and you can see exactly who is making these scrupulous trades and doing so without any, reckless abandon, basically. And I think those names, I'd like to just announce them so people at least are aware these are where these members reside. That's Austin Scott in Georgia, leads the way. These are the top 5 are Republicans. Brian Mast in Florida, French Hill in Arkansas, John Curtis in Utah, and Dan Crenshaw in Texas, who is very closely followed. It's neck and neck with Nancy Pelosi, the speaker herself. So those are the top 6 of the 35. But as you go down the list, it becomes much more nonpartisan. I mean, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, and it goes down the list. And Business Insider does a great job of also showing the map of the congressional hall, which senators and congressional members are in danger of violating these laws, which ones have openly violated these laws, and which ones are safe, which ones are doing good. And again, 430 are doing good. There is some legislation in place right now to prevent this. It's called the Stock Act, which is the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge. The Stock Act, very clever of them. This was passed in 2012, but the issue here is it's lip service. It's actually ineffective. It's just there to make us feel like we're safe. The teddy bear is in our hands. Don't worry, we're regulating ourselves. We got this. So the Stock Act requires the congressional members report any trades they make within 45 days. Well, that rarely happens. Last year, 54 members of Congress didn't report their trades within 45 days. And 182 staffers, these are people who work for congressional members, maybe not those 54, but people who work in Congress, also violated the Stock Act. So again, the question of who watches the watchmen, this is where we talk about what can be done about this. There's no oversight really. And making another committee to oversight the committee of people who are violating things on their own committee, it just becomes too many cooks in the kitchen. So I really do, this look at the maps, look at who's violating these things, and try to organize ways to get these people out. Nancy Pelosi's been in office for 35 years, and she's made millions of dollars on a, let's say, $174,000 salary. Her estimated net worth is between $40 and $252 million. So you do the math, 174 pre-tax, and you're pulling in, even at 40 million, that's questionable. So the best thing really is to support the members who are putting forth these bills, like John Ossoff and Chip Roy, Michael Cloud, AOC, any of these people who are actually advocating to prevent this. I would pull your support behind them, regardless of your political affiliation and what you think of them outside of that. I think this is a unified front. I think all Americans agree this is wrong. We need to correct this. And a public servant is just that. They serve us. We don't serve them. So let's stop rewarding them for that.
Yeah, Addison Hosner joining us talking Congress. Let's be practical here for a minute. This is an election year. It's going to be a highly contentious election year. 2022 is, of course, a midterm election. We're expecting there to be a lot of turnover in Congress. Is there a chance that just sheer politics is going to play a role here? Maybe this will get more attention because it's an election year than it otherwise might have. Is there a potential for it to be like the house banking scandal or like the post office scandal or some of the other, untoward financial scandals we've had in the past? Or do you think because it's an election year, they might try to sweep this under the rug? Because again, this is a lot of members of Congress. It's a bipartisan list. The speaker herself's involved, so you can take that for what that's worth. Which way do you think this will break with extra attention being on Congress, and a Congress, frankly, that's under a whole lot of political pressure right now on a lot of fronts?
So, Andrew, I like to think that the American public is informed, or at least they attempt to inform themselves. But I think everyone is aware the last few years have really demonstrated to us that's not exactly the case. The main problem I'm seeing with, I think, the information being sent out is depending on what news network you're watching, what websites you peruse, you're getting a certain side to the story. Now, if people are angry at Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats for insider trading, and they're mad at them because they're Democrats and they want to vote those people out, well, as long as they're voting out the people violating it, I'm okay with that, and vice versa. However, it is a nonpartisan issue. And I think we're looking at a potential situation where things get swept under the rug because at the end of the day, the vast majority of Americans, I think, frankly, don't care. People are upset about it. Everyone likes to be mad, but no one really likes to do anything about it. If that was the case, I think we'd have a lot more efficient congressional members to begin with. Instead, people are voting with emotion, or they simply look at the R or the D next to the name and they vote whoever's opposite of what their political affiliation. They won't vote for that person, regardless of if they're supporting insider trading stocks or not. So with this election cycle, Pelosi, I think, has made, after her term is up, she's saying she's going to retire. I doubt it. But, when it comes to any of these people, if people are that upset about it, make enough noise about it, then you should be primarying these incumbents who think they're just going to get the election seat again and be able to run once more. But again, that takes initiative. It takes information. It takes a level of care. And if people aren't being personally affected by things, I have found this with many issues, from drug laws to private prisons to this insider trading. If they don't feel it in their personal life and it's hurting, the right people, I guess, even though it's hurting all of us, then they're going to be less inclined to take action about it. So the number one way I think this can influence elections is to make sure it remains on the forefront of people's opinions, and it doesn't get presented as a means to make things more partisan and divide us. This should be a unifying issue, regardless of who's running for office. You should not stand for this. And if you do, I think that speaks very clearly to your intentions, what you stand for, and what you think the public office really means. And again, that list of 35 people who are beating the S&P 500, those would be the first 35 that I primary and get out of office. It'd be that simple. There's one of them in Florida. Unfortunately, he's not in my district, so I can't get rid of Brian Mast. But if I could, I would. So I implore my fellow Floridians, make it happen.
Yeah, Addison Hosner joining us. One other thing on this, and just to put a bow on all this, I'm one of those people that I'm a big believer in freedom and liberty, but I think accountability has to go hand in hand to make that applicable to everybody, which is what we want. We want the most freedom for the most amount of people. You quoted the statistic from the 50s until today, the drop in approval rating that, our Congress has the approval rating of a cholera outbreak right now. How important is it, not just as a student of history, as an attorney, but also as a citizen, when we just don't have some basic level accountability on stuff like this? How devastating is that to the whole of how we're trying to govern? Because when we don't have accountability on big things like this, that means there was a lot of little things that got us to this point. They didn't just start with $290 million across 105 members. It was a lot of little stuff that built up to that, right? So just talk about that briefly to kind of put a bow on this of we got to be accountable in these little things if we're going to have a free people self-governing in the United States of America, don't we?
Yeah. And, I'm trying to think of some good examples of all the little things. There's been so many that they kind of all blend together. The number one issue, from my perspective and in my opinion, on the lack of trust here is when people lack trust in government officials. And for the longest time, people have always thought, well, if I just vote out this person because they're not doing what I like, I'll vote in my person, they'll change things. I mean, just look at this last election with Trump to Biden. Everyone thought we get rid of Trump, we bring Biden in, it will fix all the issues that Trump presented. Well, if there's anything I've learned in my life is that the president is more of a figurehead. It's more of the same. It's the elected officials beneath the executive branch that actually make things happen. That's Congress. But when Congress is not helping the American public and the lack of trust is beginning to fester and really get bad, then I think you run into apathy. You run into a situation where voters, frankly, don't care. The issues no longer matter. It's based around more of Emotionally, how do I feel about this individual? Does this make me feel like I'm winning? And when you divide the country the way we're divided now with the partisan politics, we're losing sight of what the role of government is, which is to assist the American public. But when it's clear through our research on trust that that's not happening, and that the American public, regardless of who they vote, really is getting the short end of the stick, I think apathy at the polls will continue to rise. And with that, you're going to have the less informed voters voting, as the more informed voters realize, does it really matter who wins? Because even if I get my candidate in, if, again, the majority of those 105 are still around, well, they can filibuster and completely prevent the bills that would regulate these issues from passing. And that's what I think the risk we're running. But, we're at 105 right now out of 535 of voting congressional members. Let's stop the bleeding. And apathy is the number one danger to any progress, whether it's in your personal or professional life. And if we let apathy govern our own ideas of what government should be, then I don't think fixing the issue, it's never going to fix itself, but it certainly won't get better. And this is very 1984 to say, but the longer you let these things erode, eventually your freedoms will begin to erode until you realize, wait a minute, I don't like this. We need to stop it. It's too late. You've already let it happen. And that's kind of what you're alluding to. The small things continue to add up to these big things. And once these big things are in place, forget it. You're not going to be able to, roll the cat back into the bag. So my biggest, imploring the American people and any of your listeners is just to remain, adamant, to get public officials who truly stand for what they say. They want to see the good of this country succeed, and they stand for, free market liberty, for individual rights, and regardless of their political affiliation, that should not matter. Vote on the issues and vote for what is going to assist us in enforcing our rule of law and keeping everyone honest and accountable. That's what a society is. To quote George Costanza, we live in a society. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. And if they're corrupt, it doesn't really matter what the rest of their politics are. You're not going to get anything good out of them anyway. Addison Hosner, I so appreciate your time, sir, today. Another of the great Young Voices contributors that we partner with. Let folks know where they can find you on social media and the writing things you have going on so they can continue to follow you until we can get around to getting you back on later, sir.
Yep. So the best place to follow me, occasionally I'll make posts. I'm on Instagram under a professional account at attorney_Addison. On LinkedIn, I occasionally make posts and update on what I'm doing. But at the Young Voices website as well, you can find my talent page on there, in which you'll provide links to all the work I've done previously and what I will do in the future. And overall, Andrew, I really appreciate having me on and look forward to talking with you in the future.
Yep. And that Young Voices talent page, he'll be one like Brad Palumbo. I'm going to make sure they don't ever put my picture right beside his, because while I can compete well in the arena of idea, my headshot just can't compete with folks like y'all. But I do appreciate your opinions and views, sir. Thank you so much for your time. We'll have you back again soon, I hope.
Thank you, Andrew. Much appreciated.
Thank you, sir. Great job. Welcome back to Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Thank you for being with us. We wanted to update a story we've been covering multiple times on the program. China and the ruling parties of China and the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics in 2022. This is from The Guardian over in the UK. Headline, Team Great Britain athletes offered temporary phones over China spying fears. The British Olympic Association will offer temporary phones to Team Great Britain athletes and staff next month's Winter Olympics in Beijing, among fears they could be spied on by the Chinese government. While the British delegation will not be banned from talking on their own mobile devices, they have been warned against doing so by the British Association of Athletics because it fears, the British Olympic Association, because it fears the authorities could install spyware to extract private information or track future activities. A BOA spokesperson confirmed, quote, "We've given athletes and staff practical advice so that they can make their own choices as to whether they will take their personal device to the games or not. Where they do not want to take their own equipment, we have provisioned temporary devices for them to use. The Dutch Olympic Committee, the Dutch Sports Federation, has gone a step further by telling its athletes not to bring their personal mobile phones or laptops because it anticipates that China may carry out surveillance on electronic devices during the game. The Dutch newspaper, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, forgive me. It's a big Dutch word that starts with D, and I can't pronounce the rest of it. Volkskrant, perhaps, said the NOC-NSF would give athletes and support staff burner phones and laptops, which will then be destroyed when they return home from the Chinese capital. The article goes, folks, we should not be having the Olympic Games in China. It's just that simple. When you have to go through hoops like this, it just gives rise to the lie that this is a sporting event. This is a massive propaganda extravaganza for the Chinese Communist Party. It's also an intelligence coup because they get people from all over the world. If they're this worried about it, why in God's name are we putting athletes in this position? I feel bad for them for missing the games, but these games should be boycotted. They should not be happening, and we certainly shouldn't be rewarding China with a second Olympic Games in recent memory so that they can show how wonderful their system of tyranny is to the rest of the world. I'm sorry. It's a fraud. It's a sham. It's an embarrassment to humanity that these people that have no regard for human rights are going to parade humanity for their own gains. That you can't even take your own phone without worrying about it just tells you how ridiculous this situation is. Just my humble but accurate opinion on it. We'll do more Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. You know, we always try to end on a little bit of a lighter note. Remember that old Johnny Cash song, One Piece of a Time, where he snuck out, he was going to sneak a Cadillac out in his lunchbox, build it up over 20 years, and it was all lopsided and all that. I thought about that song reading this story. Down in North Carolina, the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, great educational institution, is giving away a special set of bones collected along a North Carolina beach. The artifact is the most complete North Atlantic gray whale in the world, according to the university, and it will go to the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. The gray whale has been extinct for at least 300 years, but this particular skeleton is almost completely intact, and it will represent the most intact specimen of the species to be on display. The interesting part of this story, it wasn't collected by scientists. The university acquired it through a private donation from a couple who collected the bones from during walks along West Onslow Beach, one piece at a time. Can you imagine putting a whale together, walk after walk? But they did it, and now it's going to the Smithsonian for generations to enjoy. Kind of a cool story. When you're walking on the beach, never hurts to pick things up and pay attention to what they are. You might wind up with a complete gray whale that's extinct otherwise. So a little lighthearted story to end the day. And that'll do it for Heard Tell today. We so greatly appreciate you watching and listening, whether you're on the YouTube channel or any of the podcasting platforms, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, or even on a couple overseas ones that I can't even pronounce correctly. But however you're watching or listening, we sure do appreciate it. Once again, if you missed it, Monday's program with Morgan Stevens, the highest watched, most listened to program we have ever done on Heard Tell, for good reason. Her story is incredible. It's an important topic that is not getting covered elsewhere. I got message after message from people saying, I just don't feel alone now. That's exactly how I feel. I could relate to this so much. That is why we do what we do, and we thank you for that. It's a privilege to have this platform. We want to use it for things like that. So if you haven't caught that episode back on Monday, Morgan Stevens, make sure you check that and share it, especially people that are having long COVID symptoms and struggling with the illness. I think it'll do them a lot of good, and we thank Morgan for that. We're going to have her back on for a longer discussion real soon. So that's it for today. Wherever you and yours are across the street or around the world, we hope you're well. We hope you're warm with most of the country in a cold spell. We hope you're well fed, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on Heard Tell. All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.
This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Save big money on new windows now at Menards. Update your home with vinyl windows from JELD-WEN. They're durable, energy efficient, and are low maintenance. Menards carries over 100 different size and style options in stock, ready to take home today. Save big on JELD-WEN windows in store, or view our weekly flyer on Menards.com for more window deals happening this week. Now at Menards.
Save big money at Menards.